The sun was shining softly through the windows of the old countryside chapel. The sky was clear, and the air smelled like fresh flowers and spring grass. It was the perfect day for a wedding. Outside, the sound of laughter and music floated through the breeze as guests began to arrive. The garden was filled with white chairs, soft rose petals, and little twinkling lights strung across the trees. Everything looked like it came from a dream. Inside the bridal suite, Emily sat quietly in front of a mirror. A hairstylist was gently fixing the last strand of her curled brown hair, while her best friend helped button the back of her dress. The gown was simple but elegant, with lace around the sleeves and a flowing train. She looked beautiful. Everyone told her so. Still, behind her smile, there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. Her heart felt full of love, but also a little heavy. Today was the happiest day of her life, but someone was missing. Her father. He had died when she was just 8 years old, serving overseas in the military. Since then, she'd held on to every memory, every photo, every word he ever said. But the hardest part of today was walking down the aisle without him. Emily touched the small pendant that hung around her neck. Inside was a tiny photo of her father in uniform, smiling just like she remembered. She had worn it close to her heart all day. It was her quiet way of keeping him with her. A knock came at the door. 5 minutes. Someone called cheerfully from the hallway. Emily stood slowly, smoothed out her dress, and took a deep breath. "Okay," she whispered, trying to hold back the tears. "Let's do this." She smiled again, this time with strength. Even though her father wasn't there in person, she felt him. And that was enough, for now. Outside the chapel, the soft hum of voices grew louder as more guests arrived. Friends hugged each other, parents greeted long-lost cousins, and children ran between the flower-covered chairs. Everyone was dressed in their best, full of joy and excitement. The wedding was about to begin, and the air felt alive with love. Rows of white chairs slowly filled up, laughter mixed with the gentle sound of the string quartet playing in the corner. Cameras clicked as people posed, and flower petals danced lightly in the breeze. But then, quietly and without fuss, an elderly man stepped through the gate at the back of the garden. He was tall, though his back was slightly hunched with age. His silver hair peeked out beneath a clean military cap, and he wore a dark green uniform that looked pressed and polished. His chest was decorated with old medals, each one carefully placed. There was something calm and dignified about him, like he didn't need to say a word to be respected. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't smile or wave. He simply walked toward the last row, paused for a moment, and took a seat in the far corner. A few guests noticed. 1 or 2 whispered quietly, wondering if he was someone's grandfather or perhaps a guest from the groom's side. But no one approached him. He seemed peaceful, as if he was exactly where he needed to be. The music continued. The laughter returned. The bride's side of the family filled the front rows, chatting excitedly about the ceremony. The groom's parents adjusted their cameras. No one gave the elderly man a second thought after a while. But from his seat at the back, the man's eyes never left the chapel door. He sat with his hands folded and his heart steady, waiting for something, or someone. The soft sound of the string quartet changed to a slow, graceful tune. The guests turned in unison, eyes fixed on the entrance of the chapel. The music signaled that it was time. Daniel stood at the altar, his hands slightly trembling. He looked handsome in his suit, but his nervous smile showed how much this moment meant to him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His eyes searched for Emily. The chapel doors opened. There she stood. Emily, glowing in her white dress, holding a simple bouquet of white roses. The train of her gown trailed behind her like a cloud. She didn't have anyone beside her. No father, no escort. Just her standing tall and proud. Every guest turned toward her, eyes wide with admiration. Some smiled. Others wiped tears. A few whispered quietly about her walking alone, but no one dared to speak louder than the music. With each step, Emily moved with quiet grace. She walked slowly but confidently, her pendant gently swaying against her chest. Her eyes moved from one familiar face to another. But then, she saw him. At the very back, in the corner of the last row, sat the elderly man in the military uniform. Her steps faltered. The music still played, but it grew faint in her ears. The world seemed to slow. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know him, or at least she didn't think she did. But something about him felt familiar. The way he sat so still. The gentle way his eyes followed her. The medals, the uniform. The quiet strength in his presence. Emily's heart began to race, but not out of nerves. It was something deeper. Something she couldn't explain. For a moment she forgot where she was. She took another step, but this time slower. Her eyes locked on his. He didn't blink, he didn't smile. He simply nodded once softly, almost like he was giving her permission to keep going. Emily blinked back sudden tears. She didn't know who he was. But somehow deep down, she felt like he knew everything. Emily's steps slowed even more until, suddenly she came to a complete stop, right in the middle of the aisle. Gasps rose quietly from the rows of guests. The music faded out, unsure whether to continue. Everyone turned to look at her, confused. Murmurs began to spread softly through the crowd. Daniel shifted at the altar, concern crossing his face. His smile disappeared as he watched Emily freeze in place. But she didn't look at anyone else. Her eyes were locked on the man in the last row, her lips trembled. "That's him," she whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. The words weren't meant for anyone, but the silence was so deep a few guests caught it. The whispers grew louder. People glanced back toward the man in the military uniform, now sitting even more still than before. Emily clutched the pendant around her neck, her breathing became uneven, and her eyes began to shine with unshed tears. Without thinking she turned around. Her dress shifted with her as she walked not forward, but back. Step by step, her eyes stayed locked on the old man, drawn to him by something more than curiosity. It felt like her heart already knew the truth, even if her mind couldn't fully believe it yet. By the time she reached him, the entire chapel was silent. She stopped just in front of him. The only sound was the soft wind moving through the trees, and the quiet hum of the world holding its breath. Her voice was shaky. "Were you with my dad, when he—" Her words faded, caught in the lump rising in her throat. She swallowed hard. "When he died." The man looked up at her. His eyes, though old and tired, were kind, and filled with something deep and heavy. "Memories." He slowly nodded. Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks. She wasn't sure how she knew, but she was certain in that moment, this man wasn't a stranger. He was a part of her past, of her father's story, of a promise long held in silence. And now, here he was. Right when it mattered most. The elderly man rose slowly from his seat. Every movement was careful, as if weighed down by the years and memories he carried. He adjusted his uniform slightly, and looked directly at Emily. "I'm Colonel James Matthews," he said, his voice low but clear. "Your father, Captain David Harris, was my best friend." A hush swept through the entire garden, all the murmurs, all the confusion faded away. People leaned in, drawn by something powerful happening before them, something they didn't fully understand yet. Colonel Matthews's eyes softened as he continued. "Your father saved my life. He saved the lives of our whole unit. The day we were ambushed, he stayed behind to cover us. He didn't hesitate, he made sure we got out." Emily's lips trembled, her hands covered her mouth as she listened. "He talked about you every single day. Showed us pictures. Told us how you liked to twirl in the living room when you were little. How you wanted to be a teacher someday, and how proud he was of you, even when you were only 8. Tears poured freely down her cheeks. The colonel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, and carefully pulled out a small folded envelope. The paper was old, the edges worn with time. He held it out to her, with both hands, gently. "Before our last mission, he gave me this. He said, if anything happens to me, and my little girl ever gets married, I want someone to be there for her. I want her to know I didn't forget." Emily stared at the letter in disbelief. Her hands shook as she reached for it. The handwriting on the front was familiar, her father's. Written in faded ink, it simply said to Emily, on her wedding day. Her knees weakened, and she broke down in quiet sobs. Colonel Matthews stepped forward, steadying her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. There was no ceremony now, no script to follow, just a moment that touched everyone in the room. The guests sat frozen, their eyes filled with emotion. Some wiped tears from their cheeks, others held their breath, as if afraid any noise would break the beauty of what was unfolding. Daniel stood at the altar, stunned but moved. He'd heard the stories about her father. He knew how much she missed him, but he never imagined anything like this. And Emily, she stood holding the last words her father ever wrote. In that moment, time stood still. Emily held the letter tightly, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The paper was delicate, aged by time, but her father's handwriting was still strong and steady. She opened it slowly, taking a deep breath before reading aloud, her voice cracking with emotion. "My sweet Emily," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't be there for the biggest day of your life. But I want you to know, I'm with you. I always have been. I hope you've found someone who sees your heart the way I did when you were little, twirling around the house with your mom's scarf in your hair. Never forget how loved you are. Never forget how proud I am of you." Her voice broke, and she paused to wipe her tears. Around her, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. The guests sat in stunned silence, many of them openly weeping. Emily looked up at Colonel Matthews, her eyes soft but strong. "Would you walk me the rest of the way?" The colonel's eyes widened for a moment, then he nodded, firmly, respectfully, and offered his arm. Without a word, she placed her hand in his. They turned together, and the music gently began again. This time, the walk down the aisle felt different. It was no longer just a tradition, it was a journey of love, loss, and healing, of a promise kept across time. The guests rose to their feet in quiet honor. Daniel stood tall at the altar, tears in his eyes, nodding with deep respect. Emily walked forward, no longer alone. She was carried by love, her father's, the colonel's, and everyone who had come to witness this powerful moment of beginning and remembrance. The ceremony continued, but something had changed. There was a new energy in the air, deeper, fuller, almost sacred. It was no longer just a wedding. It had become something more. As Emily and Daniel exchanged vows, their voices shook with emotion. They weren't just promising love to each other. They were honoring a legacy, one built on courage, sacrifice, and a father's unshakable devotion. When they were finally pronounced husband and wife, the applause wasn't just joyful, it was heartfelt and heavy with meaning. There wasn't a soul in the room who hadn't been moved. At the reception, Colonel Matthews stayed, though he didn't seek the spotlight. He sat quietly at a corner table, his posture still and composed, as if the weight of all the years he'd carried had momentarily caught up with him. But he didn't seem lonely, there was a peace about him, a calmness, that only someone who had experienced so much could possess. It wasn't long before people began to approach him. First, it was one or two hesitant at first, but then more followed. They'd heard the story, seen the bond between the colonel and Emily, and they wanted to thank him. They wanted to hear more about her father, this man who had been a hero, who had given everything for his country. One by one, they shook his hand, offering not just gratitude, but respect. Some were quiet, simply nodding in acknowledgement. Others wrapped him in a hug, sharing a kind of unspoken understanding that transcended words. There was an overwhelming warmth in the room, a collective feeling of appreciation and reverence for the man who had kept his promise, a promise made many years ago. Emily never strayed far from him. She wasn't just the bride anymore, she was a daughter whose heart had been filled with both joy and sorrow. As the evening went on, she sat by the colonel, talking to him, as if no time had passed at all. They shared stories of her childhood, her favorite moments with her father, the memories of him that had shaped her life. Some of the tales she told the colonel, he already knew, for her father had spoken of them often. The colonel smiled at the familiar stories, nodding along with each word, as if he too could picture those moments in his mind. But then, there were new stories. Emily shared details of her life, her struggles, her triumphs, the things her father never got to witness. And though they laughed together, The tears that followed were inevitable. They were tears of healing, tears that came from a place deep within, tears of love, loss, and a bond that could never be broken. Daniel, who had stood quietly by through it all, finally joined them. He too expressed his gratitude. He thanked the colonel for being the kind of man who kept his word, no matter how much time had passed, no matter how far the distance. He knew that this wedding wasn't just a new chapter for him and Emily, it was also a moment of healing for both of them, a moment of connection to a father who had been lost but would never be forgotten. That night, Emily's wedding became so much more than the union of two people. It was a tribute to a life once lived, to a hero who had given everything and asked for nothing in return. It was a tribute to a promise made long ago, a promise that had crossed oceans, been carried through the years, and was now fulfilled. In the quiet corners of the room, in the silent space between each word and every gesture, it felt as though Captain David Harris was there too. Watching, smiling proud beyond words as he saw his daughter, now a woman, surrounded by the love and respect she had always deserved, because love never truly ends. And some promises live forever. Thank you so much for watching this emotional story. If it touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video. It truly helps us keep sharing meaningful stories like this. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment that felt like fate or a promise fulfilled? Leave a comment below, and let's share in each other's journeys. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life inspired stories told with heart. And if this story moved you, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that love, honor, and memories never fade. Thank you for being here. Your support means everything.